Hello and good morning, friends. Welcome to CEC Live Lecture. Dear friends, with our ongoing series on business research methodology, today we are going to talk on one of the important tests. Dear friends, depending on the size of the samples, the tests are being done. When the sample size is larger, the Z-test is being done, which we have already been discussed. We have discussed in our previous session. In today's session, we would be discussing on a test which is used when the sample size is small. Yes, friends, you have correctly noticed. We are going to talk on a t-test which is used for small sample size. And for this discussion on t-test, we have with us in our studios Dr. Namita Rajput. Dr. Namita Rajput is principal in Sri Aurobindo Evening College, University of Delhi. And Dr. Rajput is a prolific, I would say, a professor as well as a principal too, who is doing a lot in the area of academics and believing in building the nation with the dint of her knowledge, wisdom as well as experience. Friends, let's welcome our guest, Dr. Namita Rajput. Before that, we would like to ask you to call her, that is to call us through our toll-free number, which is 1800-110-430. I repeat, our number is 1800-110-430. This is our toll-free number through which you can contact us and ask questions from Dr. Namita Rajput on today's topic, that is t-test. All friends are requested to call in the last 10 minutes so that first you could have a deep insight into today's topic, and afterwards, yes, in the last 10 minutes, we promise to give answers to your questions. Let's welcome our guest, Dr. Namita Rajput, and let's try to have a deep insight into today's topic. Hello, ma'am. Welcome to the lecture.
Good morning, friends. Today we'll be talking on t-test. Now, as you all know, t-test and z-test are commonly used when we have to compare the two sample sizes, that is a small sample or a large sample, or between any two samples for that matter. So, we have a standardized value. We compare the value of one mean sample with the other, and we are able to comprehend the conclusions about the test. So, in this backdrop, let us start with the concept called t-test. T-test and z-test are commonly used when making a comparison between the means of two samples or between some standard values and the mean of one sample. There are different varieties of t-test which are used in different conditions depending on the design of the experiment or the nature of the data. These are explained in detail in the following sections. So, the first section which we are going to discuss today is a basic concept, a t-test and a z-test. T-test are similar to commonly encountered z-test in many ways. Both z and t-test have the same rationale but use different assumptions which require a careful selection depending on the requirements. For z-test, the population mean and population standard deviation should be known exactly, whereas in many of the real life problems, while population is known and exact population standard deviation cannot be calculated, in such cases t-test should be used. Besides, the t-test does not require a big sample size. Most statisticians feel that with the sample size of 30 to 40 results, the t-test are very close to those obtained from the z-test. So, there are three different types of t-test which we will be talking about today. One sample t-test, independent sample t-test, and dependent, that is the paired sample t-test. So, all of these are explained in the further sections. Today we are talking about specifically the t-test and its various categories. In this regard, we must understand that z-test is only applicable when the standard deviation of the population sample and the mean is exactly known to us. The only difference between the z-test and the t-test is that in t-test should be used when it does not require a big sample, 1. 2. In many of the real life situations, the population mean is known, but the standard deviation, which is exactly related with the population size, it is not known to us. So, these are the two things which you have to keep in mind. 1, when the sample, the mean is known to us, but the standard deviation is not known to us, number 1. Number 2, when the sample size is less than 30 or it's a very small sample size. In these two situations, we make use of a t-test. And we have also understood in this regard that we are talking about three types of various t-test. A simple t-test, that is the independent samples, the dependent paired samples, and of course the paired between the paired sample test. So, we will be talking and taking care of it one by one. So, the first thing which we are talking about here is a simple one sample t-test. Understand it very carefully because this is the most frequently used test. One sample t-test is used to compare the mean of a single sample with the population mean. Some situations where one sample t-test can be used are given below. An economist wants to know if the per capita income of a particular region is the same as the national average. A market researcher wants to know if the proposed product will be able to penetrate to a certain level in the households in order to make its introduction profitable. The quality control department wants to know if the mean dimensions of a particular product have shifted significantly away from the original specifications. So, these are the three examples which we are trying to have here, that here we are trying to test only a one variable, that is some situations where only one sample t-test can be taken. Here the most important example which we have taken here is that if an economist wants to know if the per capita income of a particular region is same as that of the national average. So, in this particular example, the national average income is known to us and we are trying to compare that whether the per capita income of a particular region is equal to that average or not. So, this is a one sample t-test. So, if the situation is like this, we make use of a one sample t-test. Now, coming on to the second category, that is the independent sample t-test. As the name suggests, in the real situations, we cannot determine exact value of the population mean. We are only interested in comparing two populations using a random sample from each. Such experiments, where we are interested in detecting the differences between the mean of two independent groups, are called independent sample test. Some situations where independent sample t-test can be used are given below. An economist wants to compare the per capita income of two different regions. A market researcher wants to know in which territory will his product able to penetrate more. This will help in deciding the right place to introduce the product. A labor union wants to compare the productivity levels of workers for two different groups, maybe a group of one and a group of another. So, they are just trying to compare the productivity levels of the workers. So, here the trade union has two samples in size, sample A, one category of trade union, sample B, other category of trade union. They are just trying to infer the basic differences in their levels of productivity. So, here we have two independent samples, that is one sample is not dependent upon the another sample, but the sample size is small. So, the categorization about using a type of a test is called as a t-test. Another example to clarify more about the examples of a t-test where it can be used. An aspiring MBA student wants to compare the salaries offered to the graduates of two B schools. So, in this case also, one B school is different from another B school. They are not having any kind of association between the two. So, we are just trying to find out when the people who are completing their MBA, that is Masters of Business Administration, what is the difference in the salary which they are getting compared to two business schools. Whether A business school is good enough to give good placements to their students, or B business school is better compared to A business school, giving them a good kind of a remuneration. So, in both the cases, here we are trying to find out, it's an independent samples and we are trying to find out what is the difference between the salary levels. So, in this examples, the purpose is to compare two independent groups. In contrast, in determining if the mean of a group exceeds a specific value in the case of one sample t-test. So, in that case, we have done till now two types of t-test. The first test which we took was one sample t-test. The example was very clear that an economist wants to understand whether the per capita income of one region is equal to the national average or the national gross capita income. So in this case, we are just taking one sample, that is sample A, and we are just trying to compare that whether it is equal or not equal to the national averages. So here the understanding is that we are taking into consideration only one sample. The second aspect which we started today and completed was an independent T-sample test. In this case, it is very easy to understand that we are just taking two independent samples. We are just trying to compare the averages. We are just trying to compare the standard deviation. So you must understand here the mean is known to us, but the standard deviation is not known to us. That is a precondition of using a T-test. And the second condition is that the sample size should be less than 30. So having this kind of an understanding, we give an example of two business schools. Like an MBA aspirant wants to understand which B school is better. So he would try and infer and compare the two business schools which are independent of each other, that which business school is going to give us more salary in this regard, or in which B school the placements would be better. So this is a kind of an example. Here the orientation is that we are just trying to have a clear understanding whether sample A is better or sample B is better. We're just comparing the two samples. So if this is the consideration, we call it as an independent sample T-test. Now, another example here we have done here is about the trade union. They are just trying to compare the productivity levels of two groups of the labor group 1 and the labor group 2. So they are just trying to compare the productivity levels of the two groups. So in this kind of an orientation also, we would be taking into consideration independent sample T-test. So taking it forward, we have another category, that is a third category, which is called as a dependent or a paired sample T-test. In case of independent samples test, for testing the differences between the means, we compare the observations on one sample are not dependent on the other. Again, in case of independent sample testing, for testing the differences between the means, we assume that the observations of one sample are not dependent on the other. However, this assumption limits the scope of analysis, and in many cases the study has to be done on the same set of elements, that is the people, objects, etc., to control some of the specific sample extraneous factors. Such experiments where the observations are made on the sample rate at two different times is called as a sample dependent or paired sample T-test. Some situations where dependent samples T-test can be used are given below. The HR manager wants to know if a particular training program had an impact in increasing the motivation level of employee. So in this case, as you see that the training is given to the employee and they want to just understand the outcome of that training program. So it is the dependent sample. In this case, the orientation is tested in case of pre and post training program. That is, what was the orientation at the beginning of the training session and what is the orientation at the end of the session. So in this case, overall the things have to be kept in mind. The production manager wants to know if new method of handling machines helps in reducing the breakdown period or not. An educationist wants to know if interactive teaching helps the students learn more compared to one-way lecturing. Another, one can compare these cases with the previous ones to observe the differences. So the subjects in all these cases are the same and the observations are taken at two different times. So this is a pre and a post scenario. Number one, we want to understand the differences in the training program. What is a pre and a post scenario? In case of any, the educationist lecture is given to the students and you want to understand what is the differences between pre and post performance of the students. So in all these cases, there has to be a differences between a pre and a post scenario. That is a dependent sample. Dependent on what? Dependent on any of the circumstances which has, we've given 2-3 examples to explain the concept. Now basically let me give you a recap of what we have did today. We started with the concept of a T-test. T-test is a testing technique in which we are trying to test the hypothesis in which the sample size is less than 30. Number two, when the sample mean is given, whereas the standard deviation is not known. The difference between the t-test and the z-test is that the z-test is used to a sample size greater than 30, number 1. Number 2, in conducting of the z-test, essentially the mean and the standard deviation is known to us. So this is how we differentiate between the two types of the test on the number of the people to be considered, that is the sample to be taken, the size of the sample to be taken, and the knowing of the mean and the standard deviation is concerned. Then we started on with there are 3 types of t-test which we are talking about today. One is a one sample t-test. In this we are just trying to compare. The example which I took was that what is the differentiation between the average of a country and a per capita income of one region. So here we are just trying to compare the two values. The sample here taken is only 1. Then we had another example of independent t-test. In the independent t-test, here we are trying to talk about the two orientations, that is we want to understand the differences in the productivity levels of the two groups, that is A and B. That is, what is the difference in the productivity levels of A and B, number 1. Number 2, we talked about the business schools. There are 2 business schools, A and B. Students wants to understand that what is the packages and how good it is comparing the 2 business schools A and B, which is a better one in terms of the output or giving a good placements to the students. So they are just trying to compare the 2 business schools. In this case, business A school and business B school are independent of each other. So that is why the name given here is independent sample t-test. So just trying to compare 2 samples of 2 business schools. So they have no relation in terms of their working, efficiency, productivity, etc. We are just trying to standalone compare the 2 samples. The third is your dependent sample t-test. In this case, we are just trying to find out one situation, like for example, we give a training levels to some people and we are just trying to find out that what is the difference in the pre and the post training and development program which has endorsed to them in terms of increasing and raising their productivity levels. And similarly, another example was that the production manager wants to understand that after the implementation of the new method, how different the productivity levels is, and whether it is able to minimize on the cost, on the handling of the machines, reducing of the breakdown period, etc. So all these things have to be kept into consideration. Similarly, another example was given in terms of the education, like if one lecture is given to the student, so what difference does it make in terms of decreasing or increasing the productivity levels or the academic levels of the students, whether the lecture was efficient enough to take care of their levels or not. Similarly, we have another thing in mind, that in these all cases, with the previous ones to observe the differences, the subject in all these cases are the same observations are taken at 2 different times, one before and the other after. So now we are trying to take these examples using an SPSS method. Various options for different types of T can be found to compare the mean options under the Analyze menu as shown in figure 4.1. So we will be showing you the figure of 4.1. We will explain the procedure. We will explain the procedure for the 3 types of t-test one by one. The first is one sample t-test. Here we are giving an example. We have to be very meticulous, slow in learning the first sample t-test. We have understood the concept, the meaning, the criteria and the conditions under which the t-test is used. So now we will be using a software called Statistical Package for Social Sciences. In this case, it is very easy to put in the data, analyze the results and interpret the results. So we will be taking all these 3 types of t-test one by one using an SPSS. That is the statistical package. So please clearly understand the example. The example says what? A business school in its advertisement claims that average salary of its graduates in a particular year is at par with the average salaries offered at top 5 business schools. A sample of 30 graduates from a business school whose claim was to be verified was taken at random. The salaries are given as follows. Please understand and look at this very carefully. The first column is for the graduate students. The second is for salary. The third is for graduate and the fourth is for salary. This particular table shows us the graduate students who have been passed from that B school. They graduated and what is the salary. So we will go to the menu. Just see the first step. We go to the Analyze menu of the SPSS window when we open. When we open the SPSS window, we go to Analyze button, we drop down, we come on to Compare Means. In comparing of the means, this is the first step. So please note down the steps very carefully and you can do all these tests on your own. The data was in front of you, you can download the data and following these steps you will be able to understand how to calculate using a software called SPSS. The latest version which is available of SPSS is SPSS 22. So go to Analyze button, go to Compare Means and you would be on this window. In this the 4 options are given to you. One sample t-test, independent sample t-test, paired sample t-test and one-way ANOVA. The average salary offered at the top 5 B schools in that year was given as 77,50,000. In this problem, we want to assess the validity of the claim by the business school in its advertisements. We want to know the average salary of the B school is significantly different from 7,50,000, the average salary of the top 5 business schools for that period. So we are trying to have a null hypothesis here. Let us see what null hypothesis is formed. There is no significant difference between the salary offered by the business school in question and the average salary of the top 5 business schools. As explained earlier, the first step is to enter the given data in the data editor. The variables are labeled as student and salary respectively. You have to click Analyze, which will produce a drop-down menu of choose the compare means from that and click on one sample t-test as shown in figure 4.1. So we will be going back to this 4.1 table. In this, we are just opening, this is the data editor in which you are trying to put the data. We go to Analyze button, we go to Compare Means and we go to one sample t-test. In one sample t-test, we are trying to find out the differences between the one sample t-test. So the claim which was formed by the business school as if the top business schools offer a salary of the 7,50,000, whereas the claim was proved wrong in terms of or right in terms of we take a hypothesis in this regard. So we are just taking a sample of one sample t-test. So just see this window which is 4.1. I want to show you the 4.1 again. This is the first window of the data editor. Go to Analyze, go to Compare Means, you will have this window. Now come on to 4.2. This is a one sample t-test. So here we are taking a graduating students and we are taking a salary into account, and as you can see on the top of the window we have one sample t-test. So the variables can be selected from the analysis by transferring them to the test variables. So you just see that these two samples are selected, which is on the left hand side of the window, that is graduating and salary. There is an arrow in between the two windows. Go to that, the test variables are shown in the next slide. So next change the value is the test value box, which originally appears as 0, the one against you are testing the sample mean. In this case, this value would be 750, not 7,50,000. since the other salary figures are also shown in zeros. So now click OK to run the analysis. The output produced is shown in 4.3. This is the output of one sample t-test. As you see, we have only one sample. On the left hand side, on the one sample statistics, we have the salary. N, that is the number of the size of the sample, is 30. The mean is 713.50. Standard deviation is 81.2 and the standard error mean is 14.83. This is the output window. It is very easy to come on to the analysis of the results, but it is little difficult to analyze the results. So a researcher's orientation is not to only calculate the results but also to analyze the results. Now, if you see the next window, the one sample statistics, as we see, the t is minus 2.46, degrees of freedom is 29, degrees of freedom is sample size minus 1. So, the sample size here is 30, we deduct 1 and we have the degrees of freedom, that is 29. If you see the sig value tantamounts to the significant value using a two-tailed test. It is coming on to 0.020. The mean differences here is shown as minus 36.5. The 95% confidence level of the difference is minus 66.84 and minus 6.16. You must understand as a researcher that when you have to analyze the one sample statistics window, that is the output window, just see two parameters. One, t value, other is a significant value. So the thumb rule says that when the t value is more than 2, whether positive or negative, that shows the the direction of relationship. But in terms of analysis, we say that if you see the significant value which is coming on to be 0.02, that is, it is less than 0.05. So please note down again, when you have to analyze the output window of one sample t-test, the t statistics which we see is t has to be greater than 2, followed by the significant value has to be less than 0.05. This is also called as a p-value. For a null hypothesis to be rejected, the p-value has to be less than 0.05. So the null hypothesis which we took, let us come back to the null hypothesis which we framed. There is, just have a look on the slide, there is no difference between the average salary of the business school in question and the average salary of the top 5 business school. This was our null hypothesis and we tried to find out that whether a significant difference was there as they are doing some kind of an exaggerated claims or not. So here the null hypothesis is rejected. Why? Because the p-value is less than 0.05. So their claims are wrong and the B school, the salary which is offering is significantly different from the salary which is being offered by the top 5 business school. So these kind of analysis are very important for decision making for a normal aspirants of an MBA, which the example which I told you, because here the orientation was to compare the salary which is offered by the top 5 B schools and that B school. So here the null hypothesis which we took was that there is no significant difference between the two, but yes, the analysis shows that the t value is greater than 2 and the p value is less than 0.05. So their null hypothesis is rejected. So this is how we analyze the one sample statistics. It gives the descriptives of the values. The second table one gives us the t statistics analysis, and the first entry of t statistics next is the degrees of freedom and the significant values. So overall the analysis is that we are negating, rejecting the null hypothesis. So this is how we analyze one sample t-test.
With this note, thank you ma'am. Thank you so very much for giving us a precious session on the t-test. Dear friends, we would be meeting after a very short break and would be discussing further. Hello friends, welcome back to this session, and you know that we are talking on t-test today. You very well know that t-tests are being done when the sample size is small. In the previous session we have discussed a lot about this test, and we'll try to give you more and more information on this test in this session also. And for this discussion we have with us in our studios Dr. Namita Rajput. So I would like to request Dr. Rajput to continue further.
In the first session we took on the first one sample t-test. In this session I will be talking on independent sample t-test. Let us have a look on this. The study was conducted to compare the efficiency of the workers of the two mines, one with the private ownership and the other with the government ownership. The researcher was of this view that there is no significant difference in their efficiency levels. Total tonnage of the minerals mined by worker in one shift was chosen as a criteria to assess his efficiency. 22 workers from the private sector mine, 24 from the government owned mine were selected, and their average output per shift was recorded. The data obtained is given in table 4.2. In this problem we want to assess whether the efficiency of the workers of the two mines is the same. The null hypothesis in this case would be that there is no difference in the efficiency of the workers of the two mines. Let us take the null hypothesis. Average output of a worker from mine 1 equals that of the workers from mine 2. The alternative hypothesis in this case would be the worker of two mines significantly differ in their efficiency, that is, the average output of workers of mine 1 is significantly different from that of the worker of the mine 2. The variables are labeled as miner, mine and output respectively for entering into SPSS program. Click on Analyze, which will produce a drop-down menu. Choose the compare means from that and click on independent sample t-test. The resultant dialog box will be shown in 4.1. So first I will show you the window which will come. So this is the window which will come in this regard. So go to Analyze, go to compare means, and then you can see the second is independent sample t-test. So this is how we have to select the independent sample t-test. You have to select the independent sample t-test once you are comparing the two independent samples, and your orientation is to have a differentiation between how they differ in their performance and efficiency levels. So we are comparing here the mines, two mines, mine 1 and mine 2, and we are just trying to find out whether the workers perform better in mine 1 or not in mine 2, etc. The alternative hypothesis in this case would be the workers of two mines significantly differ in their efficiency, that is, the average output of worker of mine 1 is significantly different from that of workers of mine 2. Variables are labeled as miner, mine and output respectively from entering into SPSS program. So click the Analyze button, which will produce a drop-down menu. Choose the compare means from the click on independent sample t-test. As shown in figure 4.1, the resultant box would be like this. So this is how you are going to input the data. Miners, mine 1, mine 2, the output in tons, the miners and the mines, and the output is mentioned on the extreme right column of the slide. So in this independent sample C size, these are the three variables which are shown on the left hand side. There is a select button and there is an arrow in which the test variables would be entered the next window. Initially, all the variables are shown in the left hand box to perform the independent sample t-test. Transfer the dependent variable into the test variable box and transfer the variables that identifies the group into the grouping variable box. In this case, the output is dependent variable to be analyzed and should be transferred into test variables box by clicking on the first arrow in the middle of the two boxes. Mine is the variable which will identify the group of the minors, and it would be transferred into the grouping variable box. Once the grouping variable is transferred, define the group buttons which was earlier inactivates, turns the active clicking on it and will produce the box shown in figure 4.5. This is how we are going to define the group 1 and group 2. In the example of group 1, represent the minor of mine 1. In group 2 represents the minor of group 2, that is mine 2. We have entered under the variable mine in the data editor, therefore put in 1 in the box against the group 1 and put 2 in the box against group 2 and click the continue button. Now click on OK to run the test. Now coming on to the output, which is the most significant to analyze and to explain. The output produced in the figure 4.6, which we will be showing you shortly. The first table labeled group statistics gives the descriptive statistics, that is the number of data sets, means, standard deviation, standard errors of means for both the groups. The second table labeled independent samples test gives the results of the analysis. See the output which is mentioned on the screen. The output shows that there are two mines, mine 1 and mine 2. The number is 20 for mine 1 and 24 for mine 2. You can see the mean of both. 42.5 is for mine 1, 39.12 is for mine 2. Standard deviation in case of mine 1 is 5.4, whereas the standard deviation for mine 2 is 2.7. The standard error for first is 1.2, whereas for the output is 5.6. Now, independent sample t-test. To analyze, we see the Levin's equality of variances. This is the most important thing. So again, I told you in the first session also that when you are trying to analyze the table, your orientation should be relating to the significant value and to t value if it is shown. So you can see here that the significant value is 0.000 and the t is 2.6. Equal variance is assumed is 2.6 and equal variance is not assumed is 2.5. So test for equality of the variance of means. So in this case also the 0.011 and 0.017 is there, which shows that there is, in this table we get the results of the two tests, Levin's test of equality of variance and t-test for equality of means. Table contains two set of analysis. The first is assuming the equal variances in two groups and the second one assuming unequal variances. Levin's test tells us which statistics to consider to analyze the equality of means. It tests the null hypothesis that two groups have equal variances. A small value of significance associated with the Levin's indicates that the two groups have unequal variances and the null hypothesis is false. In the given example, a very small value of this test statistics indicates the two groups, mine 1 and mine 2. They do not have the equal variance. Therefore, the statistics associated with the equal variances not assumed should be used for the t-test for equality of means. The t-test with equal variances not assumed, the t-statistics was 2.5 as I show you. With 27.03 degrees of freedom, the corresponding two-tailed p-value is 0.017, which is less than 0.05 but higher than 0.01. We can reject the null hypothesis at 5% level of significance, which means the average output of two mines are significantly different from each other. Mine 1 and mine 2 do not have the same efficiency level. However, at 1% the null hypothesis will have to be accepted since the p-value is greater than 0.01. This means that 1% level of significance, the claim that efficiency of minor of 2 is same is right. So we see here at 1% it is right and at 5% it is not true. So the table also gives the mean differences, that is the difference between the average daily output by the worker of mine 1 and mine 2. The standard error of difference and 95% level of confidence of the difference. The mean difference helps in observing the total amount of differences between the mean of the two groups, and the two values are not of much importance for practical reasons. So let us have a look on this one-tailed and two-tailed test. We may recall the hypothesis testing H0, that is 01 is equal to 02, and that is H1 01 is not equal to 02. So we are only interested in knowing if the efficiency of the workers of mine 1 is same as that of worker of mine 2. Appropriate test for this would be a two-tailed test. If we were to test the assumption that efficiency of the worker of mine 1 is greater than of mine 2, the null and alternative hypothesis would be different, and we would need a p-value of one-tailed test. The new hypothesis would be 01 is less than equal to 02 and 01 is greater than 02. The one-tailed significance or p-value can be obtained by dividing a two-tailed test by 2. The one-tailed p-value in this case would be 0.0085, which is less than 0.01. Therefore, we reject the null hypothesis even at 1%, which concludes the efficiency of the 1 is greater than that of the mine 2. So this is the syntax which is mentioned here. T is for t-test, group are of two types, 1 and 2. The missing is analysis, variables are output, and criteria is 0.95. So we have now completed two types of t-test. One was one sample t-test and the other was independent sample t-test, in which we are trying to compare the efficiency levels and the mean differences of the two samples which are independent of each other. Now the last thing of this lecture, in this we are going to take up the dependent sample t-test. Here we are going to take up an example and try to analyze that what the dependent sample t-test talks about. A corporate training institution claimed that its training program can greatly enhance the efficiency of the call center employees. A big call sent some of its employees for a training program. The efficiency was measured by the number of deals closed by each employee in a month period. Data was collected for 1 month period before sending the employee for the training program. After the training program, the data was again collected on the same employees for 1 month period. So in this case, this is the employee on the left hand side before the training program and after the training program. So here the data is collected accordingly. So the overall efficiency levels are judged at a different periods of time, since the organization is claiming that if they undergo a good kind of a training program, there are going to be a big difference and rise in the efficiency levels of the workers living there and attending those sessions. Now in this problem, we want to test the validity of the claim made by the training institution that its training program improves the efficiency of the call center employees. We want to know if there is a significant difference in the average outputs of the employees before and after going through the training program. The null hypothesis here would be that average output of the employee is same before and after going through the training program. The given data is entered in the data editor and the variables are labeled as employee, before and after respectively. So now how do we do in the SPSS program? Click on Analyze, which will produce a drop-down menu. Choose the compare means from the click of the paired sample t-test as shown in figure 4.1. The resulting box would be a 4.7. So now see how this window looks. If this is a paired sample t-test, on the left hand side we have three aspects: employee, before and after. So we are having the paired variable 1, variable 2, we have the options, we have OK, paste, reset, cancel, help. So this is a very important window in which we are trying to analyze that whether there is a significant difference before and after introduction of the program, of the training program, which was the claim which was done by a company that if the workers attend that program, there's going to be a tremendous change in their efficiency and the productivity levels. So in this regard, let us have a look on this. The variable appear in the left hand box. From this box, we have to select the variables which are to be compared. The two variables of the compared of our case are before and after. Select these variables one by one. Click on the arrow between the two boxes to transfer them to a paired variable box. Now we can compare one pair in the same analysis. Now click on OK and run the analysis. Now coming on to the most and the vital part, that is the output levels. Output produced is shown in figure 4.8, which we will be taking care of right now, in three tables. The first table, labeled paired sample statistics, gives the descriptive statistics, that is the mean, number of data sets, standard deviation and the standard error of means for both before and after situations. The second table, labeled paired sample correlation, gives the value of the correlation coefficient between the two variables and significance level for two-tailed test to assess the hypothesis that correlation coefficient equals the 0. This has been explained in detail in this chapter now, which we are going to talk about. The third table, layered paired samples test, gives the results of the analysis. The statistics gives under the label paired differences are calculated by computing the difference between the paired values. In this case, by subtracting the after variable from the before variable, the mean, standard deviation and the standard error of mean of these differences along 95% confidence interval for the means of differences are given here. Next to this are given the results of the t-test. The t-test shows a t-statistics of -3.004 with 19 degrees of freedom. The two-tailed p-value is 0.007, which is less than conventional 5% or 1% level of significance. Therefore, we can reject the null hypothesis at 5% and even at 1% level of significance, which means the average output of the employees has indeed changed after attending the training program. This is the syntax. The syntax for obtaining the output is given as t-test, pairs before and after, paired. The criteria is sin 0.95 and the missing is the analysis. So let us see this t-test window. On the left hand side, we have pair before and after. Then we have mine 40.2 and 44.15. We have n number, that is equal number for both, 20 for mine 1 and 20 for mine 2. Standard deviation is 4.3 and 6.15. This is for before and after, and because it's a paired sample t-test, and the standard deviation is 0.9 and 1.3. The paired sample correlations, as you can see, is significant value is 0.067, correlation is 0.4, number is 20 and pair is 1 and before. You can see the pair 1 before and after, the mean is coming on to be 3.9, standard deviation 5.8, standard deviation error is 1.3. So at 95% level of significance of interval of the difference, this is and the lower and the upper limit, the t is 3 and the significant value is 0.007. So overall we can say here that we have to understand the analysis part. The analysis part states what? That you have to see the two aspects together, that is the p-value and the significant value. In all the three types of tests which we have done today, I'll be taking a recap of all three of them one by one, so that you are able to have a clear understanding of how one type of test is different from the other. So the t-test so I'm giving a recap right now. The t-test is used when the sample size is less than 30, number 1. Number 2, the difference between the Z and the t-test is that the Z-test is done and conducted when the population mean and the standard deviation is known to us essentially exactly. In case of t-test, the mean is known to us but the standard deviation is not known to us. So this is a particular case of application of the t-test in this regard. So we did one sample t-test. In this, the best example was that we are trying to compare only a single sample with the population mean, and some situations where it can be used, as I told you, that we have an economist wants to know if the per capita income of a particular region is that of the national averages. In case of the independent sample t-test, I gave an example of whether an economist wants to compare the per capita income of two different regions. You try and understand the orientation of how one sample test is different from the independent sample t-test is that in the first we have only one sample, in this case we have two samples to be compared to each other, but the clear understanding is that one sample is not connected with the other, they have no kind of association between each other, no correlation between them, but we are just trying to have the comparative decision making in which we are just trying to find out whether one is better or the other is better. Efficiency levels, productivity levels, profitability levels. So you can compare anything of the two samples which are independent of each other. So if that is the orientation, we make use of the independent sample t-test. So another example which we took here was that an MBA student wants to compare two various B schools. So he is trying to have an orientation whether A is going to fetch him a better salary or B is going to fetch him a better salary. So this is a kind of the basic comparison between the two. So this is one thing which you have to understand. Now the most important concept of today's lecture was a dependent paired sample t-test. In case of independent samples, for testing the difference between mean, we assume that observations of one sample are not dependent on the other. However, this assumption limits the scope of analysis in many cases. The study has to be done on the same set of elements, that is the people and the objects, etc., to control some of the specifications extraneous factors. Experiments where observations are made on one sample at two different times is called the dependent or a paired sample t-test. Some situations where dependent sample t-test can be used are given below. The HR manager wants to know if a particular training program is significantly going to increase the motivation level of the employees. The production manager wants to know if a new method of handling machines is going to reduce the breakdown period or not. Similarly, an educationist wants to understand whether his interactive lecture is going to give some kind of a learning experience to their students or not. And so in all these cases, we are trying to have a comparative figure in front of us. The subjects in all these cases are the same, observations are taken at the two different times. So the sample is the same, everything is same, but you are going to take and measure and compare the sample or the same sample at two different various intervals of time before and after the training program is being launched. So in the first case, when you are trying to have one sample t-test, let us have a look on this again. These are the number of graduates, the salary of the two students. So we go to, it's because it's a one sample t-test and we are just trying to compare that one sample with the averages. So just go to compare means, go to analyze, go to compare means and select one sample t-test. So the average here is 7,50,000. So we are just trying to compare how it is different from the other. So the null hypothesis which we took was there is no significant difference between the average salary of the B school is a question and the salary of the top. So just see and have a look on this. The output. This is the output figure. In this the salary is given, the T value is given, the degrees of freedom is given and the significant value is given. Again, the orientation for the researcher is a very important takeaway which I am going to tell you is that you have to see either the T value or the P value or the significant value. If the T's value is greater than 2, it's a thumb rule, then of course the significant value will be less than 0.05. So that means there is a significant relationship of whatever you are testing. So in one sample T statistics, the null hypothesis is rejected because the P value or the significant value is less than 0.05. Had it been greater than 0.05, the things would have been accepted. So therefore, a null hypothesis to be rejected, the significant value has to be less than 0.05. Then we came on to independent sample t-test. So we are going to just give you the output window so that your memories are fresh in this case. Here we are trying to compare the two mines, mine 1 and mine 2, and we are trying to compare the productivity levels of the two mines 1 and 2. So just have a look on this, go to this window, go to analyze, compare means, select this, and you have this window in front of you, independent sample t-test. So there is one grouping variable and there are two things which you are trying to compare, that is the output of the two mines 1 and 2. So let me first tell you that when you are comparing the two groups, you have to give them some kind of a figure, mine 1 and mine 2. So in this regard, let us see the output figure. This is the output figure in front of you. The output of two mines 1 and 2, the mean values, the standard deviation, and this. So here we have two set of values, Levin's test of equality of variance and Levin's test for equality of means. So let me come on to a straight analysis part, that in this case we are trying to find out the two things, the equality of variance and equality of mean. So in both cases you have to see the t value and the significant value. Again, if the significant value is less than 0.05, there is a significant differences, otherwise not. So let me come on to the last aspect, that is the dependent sample t-test, in which we have given an example of a training program that we are trying to compare the output of the workers before and after the initiation of that training program, that whether that training program was effective or efficient enough. Again, to calculate this, we again move on to compare, go to analyze, go to compare means, and go to this paired sample test. So if you click on this and click OK, the window is in front of you. So the window says the paired sample correlations are in front of you, pair 1 and before and after, the n is 20, correlation is 0.4, significant value is itna. So overall we say that the t value and the significant value is the most important and vital value which helps in the deep analysis of coming onto a good decision making, that whether A is better, B is better, where A is equal to the averages or not, and the last is that before and after of the training program, whether the training program is efficient enough to take care of the output or not. So I hope with all these points you are able to now conduct a t-test on your own. Thank you so much.
With this note, thank you ma'am, thank you so very much for giving us a productive session. And friends, if you want to give your feedback for this lecture, then do write to us at info.cec@nic.in. With this note, we are taking your leave today. We would be meeting and would be discussing another topic under the series. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you ma'am, thank you so very much.